Top story now. Protests rage on across Egypt, with reports of at least 3 killed and some 400 injured, as police fired tear gas to disperse crowds. Unrest broke out after Wednesday's football violence, when 74 people died in post-match clashes. In Cairo, protesters continue to gather around the Interior Ministry, blaming police for doing nothing to prevent the soccer pitch deaths. They're also calling on the military council to step down. Well, let's now talk to Khaled Diab, a journalist and writer in Egypt. He's also the editor of the Current Affairs Chronicler blog. Thank you for joining us here on RT. Now, the military council head says the clashes were an orchestrated bid to destabilise the country, while, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, which came out on top in the recent elections, blamed supporters of the ousted regime. So who do you think is really behind all this violence?
Well, at this stage, it's very difficult to say who's actually behind the violence and whether it was spontaneous or orchestrated. But what's certain is that there's a security vacuum in Egypt, and this security vacuum is partly intentional. The police and the security apparatus has wanted to, since the revolution began, has wanted to punish the people for rebelling against it, and so, like in the immediate aftermath of the revolution, the police disappeared off the streets, and now they haven't returned to full capacity. There was huge gaps in the security at the stadium, so even if there was no intentional hand behind it, these lapses enabled the violence to take place.
Now, supporters sorry, if I could just interrupt. Sorry, supporters of Cairo's football club pledged a new war to defend the revolution, as they believe that Wednesday's clashes were an attempt to, well, punish them for their part in the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak. Could this become another full-scale uprising, though?
It's entirely possible. I mean, the soccer, the beautiful game, as they call it, has become a real political football in recent years. And there's been the groups of fanatical fans, if you like, who have become very politicized. They're known as ultras. They're kind of modeled on Serb and Italian politicized supporters. I mean, it's also a classic case of blowback and backfiring. The regime in recent years has tried to use football as a distraction, get people caught up in petty, tribalism and factionalism of club football, and promote patriotism through football, because, the regime was on very, thin ice, and people were sick and tired of it. So whenever it won an African championship, this was a chance for the regime to promote itself and try and build some patriotism. And it used it cynically, for example, in 2009, in a run-up to the World Cup, in the war of words that erupted between Egypt and Algeria.
OK, but as we look at these live pictures now from Cairo, thousands of people still there protesting, critics of Egypt's interim leadership have been saying that the only outcome of last year's uprising is chaos. What's your view?
No, I think the people who cry chaos have a vested interest in A, promoting that chaos, and in B, using as an excuse to hold up reforms. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, since Mubarak's ouster, have been trying to sell themselves as the guarantors of peace and stability in Egypt, and so they jump on every opportunity to drive home the message that Egypt is in mayhem and chaos, and the only way we're going to get out of this is for you to support us as your leaders. And groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, because of their close association with the military council, and because of the way the elections came out in their favor, and the way they've been calling for, they didn't want to engage in the revolution from the start. They're also jumping on the chaos bandwagon to try and finally get their taste of power after 90 years in the political wilderness.
Well, indeed, and some of the protesters are calling on the army to choose between the military council you mentioned there and those rallying against them. Is the army likely to support a new revolt?
No, the army is unlikely to support a new revolt. In the first revolt, it pragmatically supported the protesters because it saw that Mubarak's game was up. And since then, it's tried to hamper and delay reforms. And so, like, basically the changes that have occurred so far have largely been cosmetic ones to try and give the army, the generals, a sheen of legitimacy. But I don't think they have any intention of stepping down just yet, unless they're forced to do so by the street.
OK, and indeed, as we look at those live pictures from the streets of Cairo, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Khaled Diab, Egyptian journalist and writer, thank you for joining us.